Welcome to Watches with Dennis, and today I want to talk about my first thoughts on the Omega Seamaster Planet Ocean Ultra Deep. Now, Omega revealed a number of new watches last week, and I already have a video out giving my first thoughts about the 38mm Aquaterra reveals, but there's quite a bit here that I think is pretty interesting involving the Planet Ocean. And it's a little more complicated, so I'm going to try and take it in some bite-sized chunks, but we're going to do all of them. And I'm going to say all of them because broadly speaking, there are two different flavors. There's a titanium model, and then there are several versions done in what is called O-MEGASTEEL. So let's go ahead and start with some of the specifications and get those out of the way. I'm going to start with the movement this time because the movement is universal to all of them. And that is using the Omega Coaxial Master Chronometer 8912. So it has a approximately 60-hour power reserve. This is an automatic movement. It beats at 3.5 hertz. It features 39 joules, and it is METIS chronometer certified. From there, most of the basics between the titanium model and the O-MEGASTEEL models are the same, but not all of them. Let's go ahead and cover what's universal. The major thing about these ultra deeps is they all have a water resistance of 6,000 meters. They all are 45.5 millimeters in diameter. They all have a thickness of 18.12 millimeters. They have lume, they have applied indices, and that's where the similarities end. So you have two choices of metal material here. The case can either be made out of grade 5 titanium, or you can get it in O-MEGASTEEL. If you go with the titanium model, the dial color is gray. If you go with the O-MEGASTEEL model, you can either get the orange bezel with gray gradient dial, you can get the blue bezel with the white dial, or you can get the black bezel with the gradient blue dial. The titanium model comes on a NATO strap, whereas the O-MEGASTEEL models can either come on a bracelet or they can come on a rubber strap. Sizing's a little bit different as well. The diameter and the case thickness are identical between the titanium and O-MEGASTEEL models as noted earlier. However, the lug-to-lug is somewhat shorter on O-MEGASTEEL models. They run at 51.95 millimeters, whereas the lug-to-lug is 56 millimeters on the titanium model. Another visual change-up is the O-MEGASTEEL models have a symmetrical case and also feature crown guards, whereas the titanium model is a recessed crown instead of using crown guards and is not a symmetrical case. So the one final technical specification item I think we need to address is what is O-MEGASTEEL? And I'm sometimes saying it all really fast and sometimes going O-MEGASTEEL because it's spelled O-MEGASTEEL. So this is an alloy that is harder than 316L steel, which is the main steel that we associate with wristwatches. 904L steel is another option. Rolex and Ball watches are fond of using 904L steel. I'm not sure if any other manufacturers tend to use it. Comment below if you know of any. And the main differences between those two is 316L steel is harder, but 904L steel has more corrosion resistance. So the O-MEGASTEEL alloy is harder than 316L and thus also 904L steel, but it is noted as having more elasticity, which is a feature associated with titanium, which as we noted is the other option is a grade 5 titanium watch. What this elasticity means is that when the watch deforms as pressure increases on it, once it is no longer under that pressure, it will no longer stay deformed. So that's the value of the elasticity, and that's what they needed to do in order to make a steel version of this watch able to achieve what they could achieve with titanium. It is also noted that because the alloy is a different blend, O-MEGASTEEL does have a more white-looking color. I would say somewhat reminds me of white gold, and so it seems to shine better than we would associate with 316L steel. So even though Omega developed a new steel alloy to achieve this watch's steel variant, there is a cost savings associated with going with the steel option. And according to Hodinkee, the pricing on the high end is the titanium model at $12,300 US. The steel version, by comparison with the bracelet, is $11,600, or if you want to get the rubber strap instead, down to $11,200. So an $1,100 difference from the cheapest model all the way up to the highest end model. Obviously, these are all very, very high prices for a dive watch. So now that I'm through all of those particular specifications, let's go ahead and go through what my actual first thoughts are. There is no practical need for anyone to ever have a watch that can do 6,000 meters of water resistance. But what this is, and I think it's extremely impressive, is a flex. This is Omega once again coming in and flexing on their technology. And I think it's very interesting because the interplay that we see between Omega and Rolex, which is an interplay I think Omega wants us to make, is where I think these motivations come from. It may be more than that, but that, again, this is my first thoughts. So here's my thinking on this. When I look at it from the Rolex perspective, I get the impression that Rolex, which seems to be trying to move up market, and I think it's hard to say that they're not, a combination of just the raw scarcity of getting pretty much any of their watches at this point, coupled with making decisions like releasing the Explorer in gold, suggests that they may be moving away from their tool watch roots into keeping a tool watch aesthetic, but putting in features, precious metals, things you would never really use for a tool watch in order to further emphasize their luxury status. As they've continued to move up market, Rolex has seemed to be saying, okay, Tudor is what you need to turn to if you used to be a Rolex fan. So you can still see Tudor as a gateway watch to Rolex. But I think Rolex is also saying what we used to be, that's what we want you to buy Tudor for now. I think Rolex thinks Tudor is Omega's competitor and that Rolex is a step above Omega. And I think Omega looks at that and goes, oh no, we're not letting you just think you can just launch your way past us. And to me, it seems like Omega has a 3-pronged strategy in order to achieve that. Prong number 1 is they themselves have been doing things like precious metals and other variants to push their valuation up higher. They have fancy versions too. So we've covered some of those on this channel before. So they're doing the precious metal thing also on some of their watches, saying, hey, look, we can give you a luxury variant, a sports watch inspired model that isn't practical given the metal that we've chosen. But hey, if you want to show you have money and you like the look of something like Seamaster, we can give that to you. So that's strategy 1. Strategy 2 is what I think of as a Seiko strategy. And that is, let's do a bunch of limited edition models. And incidentally, these Omega Seamaster Planet Ocean Ultra Deeps are not limited models. But again, you achieve a scarcity with that. Omega is doing a false scarcity when they do a limited model, whereas Rolex is basically fallen into a true scarcity just because they can only produce a certain amount of watches, and they may not be limiting any particular model from ever, being made again or anything, but it's still just super hard to find them. And then the third prong, which I think is the most interesting one from Omega, is the technological advancement. Rolex is iterative. Their technology, I think, is very stable, very impressive for what it is, but you don't expect bold moves out of Rolex. With Omega, we've seen what they've done on the coaxial movements. Here where they are playing with new metals, achieving depths that no human being needs, but they're doing it because they can. And it's not lost on me, and I don't think it's lost on a lot of people who are watch enthusiasts. You look at this and you go, wow, Omega is really trying to show what all they can do, even in just the realm of mechanical watchmaking. And at this point, I can't think of a cross comparison of a Rolex watch and the equivalent Omega where the Omega is not equal to or better on spec. And I think that's because Omega keeps pushing on the technology. And so that's what I see this, and that's why I see why they've decided to go ahead and do a 6,000 meter depth rated watch, is because the challenge was there. Now, aesthetically, I really like these watches. My biggest complaint historically with the Seamasters have been the helium escape valves on a number of the models, including the Planet Oceans. Here we don't have that roughly at the 10 o'clock position helium escape valve that we've come to associate with a lot of the Seamaster line. And I think it makes a nice, cleaner, more symmetrical look. Now, as I noted, the O-MEGASTEEL cases here are symmetrical. It's not quite symmetrical with the titanium model, but I don't think it's obtrusive. I actually think the titanium model looks really, really clean. I had a Hamilton, actually, that was not quite symmetrical either, but the way it wore, it actually looked really good. It didn't stand out to me, and this doesn't stand out to me either. I think when you look at all the watches side by side, you can see the cleaner symmetry of the O-MEGASTEEL watches, but what they've achieved with the titanium is, in my view, a very attractive watch. I like the look of the rubber straps and how they've been integrated. My general rule of thumb would be if I were buying something like this, I would try and get it on bracelet. Obviously, that's not an option on the titanium watch. You would only get this NATO band. I don't know if they're comfortable or not. I've never worn a NATO by Omega, so I have no sense, but it's very easy to find alternative straps if you're unhappy with any of those. I've heard some decent things about Omega's rubber straps, but again, I've never actually worn one on wrist, so I can't comment there. If I were to pick between all the color schemes, I've always been a fan of orange with dive, so the O-MEGASTEEL with the orange bezel and the gradient gray, I think looks really good. As I've noted, I do like the titanium watch. That sort of gray on gray is really good. I like the blue numerals on that as well. And then I'll pick a third one as well. I'm a fan of white dials. So the blue bezel with the white dial O-MEGASTEEL watch, I also think is really, I actually like all of these look really good. These are all really well designed in my opinion. I think they're all extremely attractive. The pricing, of course, would be an issue for me and probably for most people because this is quite a bit more than we've come to associate with Planet Ocean. But again, they're really, really pushing the technology. Now, practically speaking, even if the money was not an object, I would have a problem with the thickness. I live in a landlocked state. I don't dive. I would never get these for diving purposes. And as cool as it is to be able to say, hey, this watch can go down 6,000 meters or take that much pressure, we should say. I would never be able to justify having over 18 millimeters thickness on my wrist. 18 millimeters is huge for people that don't have a good sense of the context or the scale of that. So this is not something that slips under the cuff. And while I don't wear dress shirts all the time, a lot of people do from time to time and like to wear dive watches with long sleeve shirts. And again, if it's like a t-shirt and it can stretch, maybe not a problem, but at over 18 millimeters thick, that's probably going to be a problem for any button down cuff. So there, you just need to factor that in. Like if you like to wear this with a suit jacket and a shirt, yeah, probably not going to pull it off. This also is too big for me anyway, not saying aside the thickness. The 45.5 millimeter diameter would really be pushing it for me, but that's not obscenely large either. And for people that have felt a bit of frustration, and I know there are some, that the watch sizing trend, which was going up in the early 2000s, has since been going back down again. I mean, we did just see Rolex Explorer come out with 36 millimeter. They'll probably be really pleased to see something that actually weighs in over 45 millimeters. So given what this watch can do, it needs to be a certain size. But larger people with larger wrists, football players and the sorts, I can really see them going after a watch like this. And I bet we will see a lot of athletes where this price tag won't mean anything to them actually go ahead and make these sort of purchases. But anyway, those are my thoughts on the Omega Seamaster Planet Ocean Ultra Deep. What do you guys think? Do you prefer the O-MEGASTEEL models? Do you like the titanium model? Do you hate them both? What do you think in terms of Omega's plays lately? Do you think they've been making some good steps? And I think that pretty much covers it. So if you enjoyed the video, please do give it a like. And if you want to be notified when I have a new video come out, just click that subscribe button and YouTube takes care of the rest. Thank you very much.